It's pronounced Aorus, not Aorus. How are people still getting this wrong? We're checking out a board that does two things you guys are interested in. The first thing is Z690 with DDR4. The second thing is ITX, and that's what we've got here. The Gigabyte Z690i or Z690i Aorus Ultra. So without further ado, let's take a bit of a closer look. As usual with our motherboard content, these videos are not reviews. They're just overviews so we can take a bit of a closer look at this little thing here and what physically comes in the box. So without further ado, let's take a look at what little you get with this and a lot of what they packed on this board. All right, let's take a look at the Gigabyte Z690i Aorus Ultra DDR4. This is the DDR4 variant of this board, but first of all, let's get the motherboard out of the box and out of the way so we can take a bit of a closer look at every single little itty bitty thing that comes with this motherboard. The first thing we've got is a bunch of M.2 screws for the two M.2 slots on this motherboard, which we will be looking at. There's also a bunch of PWM fan breakout cables. This is to save service space on the board. This is a pretty normal Aorus ITX thing. There's also some breakout cables for USB 2.0. This is typically now used for RGB controllers and AIOs and that kind of stuff. And if you have legacy stuff, there's also this Molex to floppy power connector to provide additional power to the mezzanine on this board, which I'm going to show in a moment also. There's also some SATA or SATA cables for your 2.5-inch SSDs or your spinning rush drives. SSDs and hard drives are becoming less common with small form factor builds now. There's also this is a 4-pin 12-volt RGB extension cable. This is just another standard thing that you'll find in these boards. There's also the Wi-Fi antenna for the built-in Wi-Fi 6E and Bluetooth on this motherboard. And lastly, the Z690i Aorus Ultra DDR4 user manual. This will walk you through getting up and running, where everything plugs in, and all of that jazz if you haven't built a PC before. And even if you have, it's also useful. Alright, let's get that little itty bitty motherboard out, unsheath it, and we'll take a bit of a close look at that Z690i Aorus Ultra DDR4. First thing we've got is a reset button. There's also that power connector for additional power for the mezzanine. There's a 3-pin 5-volt addressable RGB header, a PWM breakout header for those PWM cables, and the breakout connector for the USB 2.0 headers. There's the front panel connector for your lights and all your switches and all that jazz. There's a USB Type-C front panel connector. There's a 4-pin 12-volt RGB header, as well as a USB 3.2 header. There's 4 SATA ports for your 2.5-inch SSDs or your spinning rush drive, and the 24-pin power connector to send all that juice to your brand new motherboard. On the other side of the RAM slots, you'll notice there are 2 of those PWM fan breakout connectors for those PWM cables. On the top left-hand side of the board, there's a full-size PWM fan header and an 8-pin EPS power connector for your CPU power. Now, there's a single by 16 PCIe Gen 5 slot for your GPU, or if you're using it for bifurcation or something else. In terms of power delivery, it's got a 10+1+2 digital VRM setup. It's a direct VRM setup, and they have 105 amp power stages. You'll notice there's a heat pipe that connects both of the heat sinks, and basically all of the IO cover on this board is a big old giant VRM heatsink. Alright, let's pop that socket open if you haven't seen it before. It is reminiscent of LGA 1366 and 1356. This is LGA 1700. It's their new socket that features 1700 contact pins, and it is for the brand new Intel 12th Gen Alder Lake CPUs. You'll most likely need brand new cooler mounting to use your cooler on this, but the whole spacing is the same as LGA 1366. Taking a look at the back side of the board, it has a full cover backplate. There's no M.2 slots on the back of this board that you would typically find on ITX boards. That's because they are both on a mezzanine. Because this is the DDR4 version of this board, it features 2 DDR RAM slots for dual channel operation, up to 64 gigs of memory, and overclockable up to 5333 megahertz. All right, let's pull the heatsink off that mezzanine so we can take a bit of a closer look at how all of this works. It features 2 PCIe Gen 4 M.2 slots. This is the top layer of the mezzanine. Notice it's got a pre-installed thermal pad as well if you're using an M.2 in this position. There's also something that's hidden on this board, right? You've got your front panel audio connection, which is hidden underneath the I/O cover. They've done this because some of their previous generation ITX boards haven't had this connector, or they've removed it, or it's just in a really weird spot. This way you can put it anywhere you like. If we take out this single screw here, we can remove the mezzanine. You'll see that there is a connector here. This is a pretty standard mezzanine type of connector you'll find on server boards. But if we take a bit of a closer look at the mezzanine itself, underneath it has another PCIe Gen 4 M.2 slot. So you can have 2 in total here. And this is just a bit of a closer look at this connection here. If you were curious and you wanted to get a bit of a closer look before grabbing this board for yourself. And there's 2 connectors to handle all of the bandwidth because there's 2 slots in total. So they connect them up different ways. Okay, let's take a look at that rear I/O. There's a DisplayPort connector, there's HDMI, there's a bunch of USB 3.2 ports, there's a line out, which is for your headphones or your speakers, there's a microphone jack, there's also some USB Type-C, 2.5 gigabit Ethernet, a BIOS flashback button, there's antenna connectors for the Wi-Fi 6, and an integrated I/O shield. All right, ladies and gents, I hope you enjoyed this first look at this little board, the Gigabyte Z690i Aorus Ultra. I'm going to put this down now because it's kind of hurting my arm. It's a very heavy motherboard. As far as some of the features that we're seeing on this board, they've kind of got this whole new platform and they've jammed it into a really small form factor. And I feel like there may be some compromises with things here. I did notice they added back a front panel audio header, although it's on a cable that was kind of hidden. And if you didn't actually go and look for it, probably wouldn't have ever found it. It's a very odd choice, but it is there if it's something you wanted to use. We saw a bunch of other features that we saw on B550, on Z590 and Z490, with those little PWM breakout cables for the fans as well. That's just to save some space on the surface of the board so they can keep it that small. It's also kind of why, again, we saw that cable with the breakout for the front panel audio. It's really, really bizarre, but you know, it is what it is. We also saw some server-ish type stuff, and I noticed ASUS has been doing this as well, and having a mezzanine card with an M.2 that sits on top of it as well. I don't have an opinion on it, to be honest. It works. In terms of pricing and availability for this board, at the time of filming, it's only for pre-order, and I think it's launching when all these new Alder Lake CPUs and motherboards launch. But as far as pricing, I couldn't find any concrete pricing. I did find Australian pricing for the ASUS ITX board, and that was $849, but I don't think this one's gonna be as expensive. This one's probably gonna sit in the region of around 600-ish Australian dollars. I could be wrong, it could be in that higher tier, but I guess what I'll do is what I do usually is if I find the pricing, I'll put it in the pinned comment of this video, so then I can go back and correct myself. Or someone in the comments will correct me even when I didn't ask for it. All right, ladies and gents, that's basically everything I got to say about this board. If you like this video, smash the like button. If you hated it, hit the dislike button twice. I'm your boy Nick with Gear Seekers. You peek, we seek, and it's time to engage some cinematic things. Take a look, have a watch. It's gonna be a bit of a short one because the board's so small. Catch you next time.